Hi, good afternoon. My name is Mike Lynch, and I think we're about to start. We have a late add to the card here this afternoon, and I'll introduce them momentarily. But you're in the right room if you got it, flaunt it in today's broadband pre-conference seminar. Joining us today and speaking in order, I guess, would be Chris Mitchell. Chris is from the Institute for Local Self-Reliance. I think you all probably know Chris. We have a very enthusiastic crowd for 3 o'clock in the afternoon. That's good. And for those of you who are not following on muninetworks.org, maybe you want to start. Before I introduce Chris, I just want to say he has been working diligently, apparently, all weekend on a filing with the FCC and also on a report that is probably coming out, did you say this week, Chris?
Tomorrow.
So we're going to give him a lot of latitude and a lot of enthusiasm for breaking away and coming over here and trying to keep it all in order in his head. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you. So I was saying earlier, I don't think I've spent this much time writing on a weekend since undergraduate. It's been a very hard slog because today's the last day we can submit reply to comments on the FCC docket where the city of Wilson and the city of Chattanooga are asking the FCC to repeal some state laws that limit their ability to expand and to offer these terrific services to their neighbors. So there's been a lot of back and forth on the record, and one of the nice things about a deadline is that it prompts you to actually get things done that you've been telling funders and other allies that you're going to do. And it's been a weekend of doing that. Tomorrow morning, we're releasing a paper that's an in-depth look at, I believe it's 12 communities in Minnesota, about half and half cities and counties, and how they've spurred internet access. So some of them have built their own networks, as Monticello is one of the communities we cover, which is Jeff, who will be speaking a little bit if you don't recognize him up here. Some are counties that have partnered with cooperatives to expand access. And one of them is actually Dakota County here in Ramsey, which has done a terrific job of a dig once type program where they've made sure they didn't miss any opportunities to expand conduit that they could use in the future or that their allies can use. So it's a paper that I'm very excited about, and frankly, it's terrific. I'm a St. Paul citizen, resident here in Minneapolis, or I'm sorry, here in Minnesota. This is the lack of sleep taking over. And I'm very glad that so many people came out to NATOA here because it's an exciting time in Minnesota with some really great experimentation around the state. I think we're seeing interesting things in Minnesota that are true of across the nation, where some communities really get it and they're really working hard to figure out how they can make sure everyone has the benefits of these new technologies, and others are sitting back. And I think that describes both Minneapolis and St. Paul, frankly, where both cities are just sort of hoping that this internet thing isn't that big of a deal, and that if it is that big of a deal, that the two major providers, CenturyLink and Comcast, will do enough to keep the Twin Cities competitive. Frankly, I'm afraid that may not work. It's a strategy that others are embracing around the country to some extent, and we'll see what happens there. But some of the cities and counties are really moving ahead with interesting approaches. There's a number of them that I don't have time to go into. We're trying to keep our introductory comments very short so that we can make sure we have lots of time for interaction. But let me just say that there's a really exciting event coming up on October 20th. So 3 weeks from today, in fact, in Santa Monica, we're going to be announcing a new organization called Next Century Cities. And some of the leading cities in the country are a part of this new organization. And it's for communities that really want to make sure that everyone in their community has the benefits they can get from these next generation networks. It includes cities that have built their own networks, gigabit networks, fiber optic networks. It includes cities that are trying to figure out how to do it. And it also includes cities that have partnered with other entities, including Google, for instance. So there's a variety of approaches that will be represented by this group. But I think it's going to be something that will be very useful both to elevate the important role cities have played to get next generation networks out to everyone, and also help communities that are trying to figure out how to do this for their communities, what the best strategies are for doing that. So that's something that if you're on the NATOA listserv, if it hasn't gone out, I'll make sure it does this week, the announcement, and there's going to be a webcast of this event. And there's also the executive director, Deb Sosha, is going to be here starting on Wednesday morning. So if anyone wants to meet her or learn more about the organization, pull me aside. I also just want to mention the Coalition for Local Internet Choice, which I'm a part of, that I'm sure many of you are a part of. This is an organization that Joanne Hovis and Jim Bowler helped to create. It's focused on making sure that communities have all the authority they need locally to be able to decide if a municipal network strategy or some form of partnership is the correct approach for them. And so it's a group that really wants to make sure is not going to pressure cities to build networks or anything along those lines. It's really focused very tightly on ensuring that communities have the authority to decide for themselves what the best strategy may be. This is an organization where the website is localnetchoice.org. It's open for anyone to join. We highly recommend not only that you join, but also that you encourage businesses, business associations, nonprofit organizations, others to join as well. And I think that's probably more than enough to start off. There's a lot of things I'd love to talk about, and I hope there's a lot of questions so we can make sure it's what you want to talk about as well.
Thanks, Chris, that's great. And thank you for putting in the plug for Next Century Cities. In shameless self-promotion, I'll say that Deb Sosha is from Boston. She was last year's NATOA Broadband Hero of the Year, so I'm very enthusiastic about her new program. And I wanted to put in a plug for Boston because there are so many Minnesotans who are on this panel today and present here today. Next, I want to introduce Mitzi Herrera. And Mitzi is a longtime administrator of Montgomery County, where she's currently Director of Planning, Policy, and Special Projects. And prior to that, Mitzi had worked in Fairfax County and also at Miller Van Eaton. She is currently a member of the Federal Communications Commission Consumer Advisory Committee, and she's going to touch on some of the broadband initiatives that are going on now in Montgomery County. Thank you, Mitzi.
Okay. Welcome. I'm glad everyone came back for the afternoon. Has everyone got some coffee? All right. Okay. So my presentation, we're going to cover two things. One, I want to talk about some of the things that we're working on now and some of the things that we're looking to in the future. And we're going to see if we can make technology work for us. So this is roughly Montgomery County. We are adjacent to Washington, D.C., which is right down here. The county is about 500 square miles. It's about population just over 1 million people. We have about 384,000 households. Our county budget is approximately $4 billion. About more than half of that goes to support the school system. The median income in the county is about $97,000, but we also have 30% of the children in schools are eligible for free and reduced meals. And also, the sort of top portion of the county, about 1/3 of the land mass is reserved. It's an agricultural reserve. We have a farming heritage. We have the laws and things set up, so the housing density is very low in those areas. So what you're looking at here is, this is a map of our fiber system. It's an incomplete map because there's portions of it that go out to a couple of these places out here where we're co-located with Comcast that we're still filling in on these things. This is all sort of one network. However, the yellow represents what we had built prior to the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, and the blue indicates where we built additional fiber. So for those of us who are in the shared support group for going through the BTOP or the BIP grants, at the end of the day, when you got, for these types of things, it was a process that it was difficult, but it was, for us, we probably did things in that 4 years that would have probably taken us 11 years. Particularly, we expanded to meet 80 more elementary schools and connected all of our public housing sites. And just to give you a sense of it, in our public housing sites, some of those places, you have to have incomes less than $10,000 in order to live with them. So it's very diverse in terms of what we're trying to achieve. So what the thing about it is that when we initially built this system, some places we have spare capacity, and a lot of places we don't. But we know that when we put in the era fiber, that we would have spare capacity, that we could trade, that we could leverage for other uses. So that's partly what we're doing, and we're tentatively looking at rebranding that as, potentially we'll call it Ultra Montgomery, because we're looking at ultra broadband types of speeds. So some of the things that we've been doing with our network, we reach, as I mentioned in here, we have about 22 libraries, there's about 230 school locations, there's multiple county buildings throughout the county. So you can see here some of the things that the libraries are doing: e-books, e-readers, trying to figure out how you can actually get those devices. So some people will come and they'll have plenty of those devices and other people won't, so that's kind of a challenge. We had Wi-Fi initially in the libraries. Now you're trying to make the Wi-Fi more robust. You're trying to reach all the nooks and crannies and meeting rooms within the libraries. And you're also trying to move from models where you have static workstations and desktops to places where you've got Wi-Fi and kids can be, they look like their feet are up in the air and they're looking at their thing and doing their stuff. And there's Wi-Fi and things throughout, and they can also download and they get free music. We did actually a project in which we have a teen advisory group for the library, and they actually created videos and they ran them in schools talking to other teens about the benefits of coming to use the library. Interesting, one of them was you could actually meet to do homework and it wouldn't be weird having to go to somebody else's house for somebody that you don't really know very. It's kind of interesting. We have, I just pulled up some news stories. In the public schools, they announced an initiative in which they've got put 40,000 laptops and tablets in schools. Some of it, they're also allowing people to bring their own device. Some kids in the classrooms who have their own cell phones and doing lesson planning and these types of things throughout. One of the interesting things is that because we didn't have good mapping, we were doing some work in the schools to connect something we didn't know. We thought we were disconnecting one high school for a couple hours of maintenance, and turns out we took down the entire school system internet, which, having gone to Chromebooks, was really a big deal. So these are some things you've learned from that. Montgomery County was really one of the pioneers in open data. I will tell you that it really started with us finding $17,000 in our budget to start this little pilot program, and now it's turned off, and we have legislation, we have every department required to do data sets. One thing I will tell you about all data, it's only as good as the data you put in, and the majority of time you spend on open data is cleaning up the data set. Doing all the applications and the whiz-bang things, that's the simple part. It's actually getting good data that people reported, but they weren't really scrubbing it that well for certain things. So this is our data, our open data, or data Montgomery site. One of the things I'll point out on here is, I didn't put up a slide, but it says food inspection. So we had this food inspection, it's got this crazy report. And one of the things that we're trying to do is Yelp will actually work with communities so that when you look for the restaurant rating, you can list what their last inspection was. So you can actually try to use that. And that's actually been one of the things. I'll tell you the other thing that people look at most often is the salaries of county employees. That becomes the other big popular things. So leveraging sort of the open data is that we, like everybody else, we have budgets and we have these PDF files and all those kinds of things. And so we're trying to move those. And so what we've launched now is this open budget. And this is actually two different shots I put together for you. But the first one I just want to point out is, so it can do things where you link it to GIS. So these are all the capital projects that are going on within the county. And then because you can code them geographically and you can assign values to the size of the bubble based on the size of the project, you can actually have visual snapshots of where you're making investments in your community. In here, I just clicked on one of these, says Health and Human Services, so this amount of money. And there's these little tabs, like what's it for, where is it from, what's it going. And a lot of these things are things that you can, they're kind of in a first process. So sometimes they're just a quick snapshot, and this is what you get. In other places, you can put data in and you can field them. One thing I'll say is that back on this data Montgomery is that these spreadsheets, you can see here where it says view types, and this is using Socrata. You can export all that data. So you can have it come in an Excel spreadsheet, different things that computer people who geek out on all that, APIs and a bunch of acronyms that I don't really know what they mean, but they could transform, and that's really kind of the next level. But you can see where, again, it comes back to starting with good data. So, which brings us, though, to the next issue that we really have, and that is this chicken and egg problem. Because
Agriculture.
Yes, we are an agricultural county. Is that all the things I showed you do not require a gigabit. They do not require you to have a gigabit in the home. yes, you do need to have enough stuff and functionality to run your systems, and we run our public safety communications on there. We run networks for the community college. So part of the problem is, and if you talk to the mayor of Chattanooga, he will tell you the same thing, is that because gigabit and 100 gigabit speeds are not ubiquitous and widely available, people don't design things for that purpose. And actually, in the New York Times, they just recently did an article, and it was talking about Kansas City, and it's now you have all this gigabits, what do you do with it? And so one of the things they actually looked to see was how many cute kitten photos can be downloaded in 1 second, and the answer was 612. And you can see here, there's just not enough of these applications, and so that's really kind of looking at, in the next generation is to think outside the box. And what Steve Jobs was famous for saying is that people don't know what they want until you show it to them. If you asked people prior to the launch of the iPhone, what would you like to do with your phone? And then you ask people after iPhone 6 comes out, what would they like to do with their phone? They're very different answers. But it's very hard to get to the second conversation without having that iPhone, without people starting to test drive and to use it. And that's true of all of our data applications, is that once we started to do them, and the first generations can be a little clunky, you try your best, but then you look back years later and you're like, wow. So what we are now looking at, we're going to try to move to this interactive portion of our presentation here. If we can go to the first one, yeah, and turn the fiber layer back on. Right. So this is kind of what I had showed you. Let's just turn the fiber layer off for right now. Right. So these are GIS. We have a GIS department. You take the data. The biggest problem you're going to have is that most of this stuff, some things you don't want to make public yet, and just going so forth. So what this is showing you is that within the county, as you can kind of see that we had sort of as the boundaries are up here, the district is back down here. What we have is we have two economic development areas that we're looking at, the Great Seneca Science Corridor and the White Oak Science Gateway. And the issue there is these are places where they traditionally look like you have a big giant building and it's surrounded by a big giant parking lot. And so what they're trying to do is, in concert with putting in mass transit projects, is you generally, as you move the street closer to the building, and you add some nice streetscaping, and then you fill in and you have retail space. And so then you make a place that's more walkable, more attractive, and you make more of these communities where people live nearby where they work. What we're also looking at is that these green line represent bus rapid transit, which looks like light rail on wheels. And so the idea is that to actually create these corridors where people can use transit. And for us, what they represent is new fiber pathways, because these are places where you naturally would put in fiber because you're going to be using fare card systems. And so that gives you, since you're already doing the construction, there is a massive $16 billion program right here. This is the purple line. It's fiber that runs between, it's a transit project that'll run between two counties. And what we would be looking to do there is put fiber underneath. And right now we're having some discussions with the state in terms of how much that would end up cost. But what I'm going to do is, let's go to the next tab over, is to zoom in. And this area, what you're looking at is the Great Seneca Science Corridor that I pointed out. And what I turned on here is this is the building layer portion of the map. So you can see these buildings. And so one of the things, if we can pull the map just up slightly, is so in this area, the Johns Hopkins University has a satellite campus that they've put in, and they also have a campus in Baltimore. So part of it is that we're working with some research and educational networks, is that they could connect those two campuses from Baltimore, and we can give them some fiber. And it creates a partnership, because sometimes they have some money, and so they'll pay us to build some fiber for them, and we'll allow them to use it for free. But then we can use and leverage that fiber for something else. So what we're looking at right now is, up here, this blue dot represents a 100 gigabit POP that Max Crossroads has put in. And they actually have another one down here at the University of Maryland, also has a satellite campus. And so one of the things that we're looking at as a demonstration project is potentially building a piece of fiber that would come here. This orange line represents a mass transit project that may be in the future, and so you could see how you could create a ring. And then the idea would be is that we may want to try to figure out someplace in here that we would put a meet me point, where if you're a carrier, you just have to get to that meet me point. And you could have infrastructure that you have that goes from these buildings out to this fiber, and that they can use and leverage these 100 gig pops. There's also, if we go to the next tab, this is over in the east part of the county. Right here, this is a FDA campus that sits right here. And so what we're trying to do here is attract businesses that want to do business with the FDA. And as it turns out, up in here is a giant gravel pit that the county bought from the Water and Sewer Commission. And they're going to work with a developer and redevelop all of this. And we already have fiber that runs along this area. There is a 100 gigabit pop that's under construction up here. These other red dots, which I didn't mention on there, and the things are, these are cyber tech companies these are actually biotech companies right now. There's a lot more in the other area. But the goal of all of this is to sort of think about what we can do with gigabit as an economic development. If we can go back to the PowerPoint. Oh, great. Thank you. So what we're looking at is kind of what we just sort of called Smart Montgomery, and it actually came because the feds had something called Smart America. And what we're looking at that is really all these things I talked about leveraging these fiber assets, but also looking at, particularly in those two areas, when we look at things with right-of-way fiber and conduit requirements and things that Joanne had been talking about earlier and what they're doing in Sandy, where if you're going to go and dig up the road, putting in conduit or putting in fiber, if you're going to have the buildings redeveloped or redone, having enough riser space and conduit, and trying to find a way to incentivize the developers to do it. Because for the most part, what the developers want is to figure out how I can get my return on investment as quickly as possible. And anything that adds a nickel to everything, you have to be able to come back to say, is there a way that you could charge a higher rent to a tenant because the building is considered broadband certified? And what does that mean? Or broadband ready. But I know that as a building, and what it really means is we talk about gigabit speeds and all those other things, but what we really need is it's as much internet as you need, whenever you need it, and it's secure. And that's what gigabit or 100 gigabit and what that all really means. So the network, so we kind of under this umbrella of the Smart Montgomery, which may encompass codes and right-of-way things, then we would have a way of rebranding as our network is this Ultra Montgomery, which is this 100 gigabit right now. They have developed 400 gigabit, and they're looking that probably within 5 years they'll be at terabit speeds. I've sort of talked about this, but this is really the reason why we're looking at all of this. Is that we did a study, and it shows that for every 100 new jobs that we would create, where you have an average salary of $93,000, and this is in a county where the median salary is $97,000, so these are workable numbers in the DC region, that will pump $30 million into the economy. And for those 100 jobs, depending on whether they're in health or whether they're in IT, they will create another 130 to 180 jobs. If we were trying to sell all this as a fiber project, it wouldn't go anywhere. If you're talking about gigabit, just for that. But when you talk about it, the purpose of it is to generate other money. Then when I talk to you about an investment, I had to miss the rest of Joanne's panel this morning because on a conference call in which they agreed to, sure, you can have $50,000 to do a study to figure out how people will use this. And then, looking at trying to do that other project may be $250,000. But if I talk to you about this number, and then say as a demonstration, I need $250,000, it's a better sales pitch. And lastly, I think, oops, did I do something? Or was that my end of my slide? Hold on. I think it might be my last slide. And so in any event, so really what we're doing is we're using, in terms of gigabit, we are looking at ways in which we can make internet more affordable for people on lower income. We're sort of leveraging people who already have devices. We're leveraging what we have in our public buildings. But what we're also just doing is trying to probably work with, potentially with FDA, probably with National Institute of Science Technology. That's just our asset, that we have a lot of federal agencies. In your communities, you have different assets. But looking with them to figure out what is the future and what would you do if you had 100 gigabit speeds? And so to try to solve our chicken and egg problem. There you go.
Is this mic working? Thanks, Mitzi. I'll have a few questions for you when we're done, but first I want to introduce Jeff O'Neill. We'll bring this back to Minnesota. Jeff is the longtime administrator of Monticello, and I think you may know him from prior engagements here with Natoa, but the FiberNet.Monticello project is what he's come to talk to us about. I think you had some news this month, Jeff.
Yes.
You know, and I'm sorry, before you start, I just wanted to introduce with him is Christopher Dye, who is the CTO of Paragon, an IT vendor, I guess, for Monticello. And I'll let Jeff do the rest of the introduction because I met Christopher about 30 seconds before this started.
All right, thank you for that great introduction. And there are 11 Monticellos in the country, but there's only one Monticello, and that's why you maybe mixed that, but that's okay. That's the Eastern version of the pronunciation. That's fine, I love it. It happens all the time. But really pleased to be here, city administrator for the city of Monticello for many years, and kind of one of the persons that was involved in spearheading a project that we completed in Monticello in 2011. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the story, and then we're going to talk a little bit about what we're attempting to flaunt in Monticello. Like many of the communities that are looking at developing their telecommunications, Monticello had high cost, poor service back in 2006. And broadband really was starting to emerge as an essential service even back then. I mean, obviously people before Facebook, before Netflix, it was on people's mind in Monticello as something that we needed to make sure that we had a good resource there in the future. We wanted a competitive edge for our businesses. We wanted it for economic development. And we also wanted our incumbents to provide it, and we asked them nicely. We said, please, please, we think this is, in order for us to be competitive in the world, we think that fiber optics is a way to go. Our prices are way too high. The service is not where it should be. The environment was kind of a monopoly setting. Obviously, you know what the response was. It was, no, you've got plenty good copper in the ground. So it was just really a matter of the citizenry to say, well, do we want to take care of our own? Do we want to embark on a more of a self-determination route? And they said yes, so we went forward. So today we have probably among the fastest and affordable service enjoyed by all residents and businesses for FiberNet with our FiberNet system. We are offering the triple play, and that was the model that we started in 2007, and that's what we have going today. It was really interesting listening to the community of Sandy that they just went with internet, and they have a whole different model now today. Obviously, we'd probably go that way if that's where if we were starting today. But we have the legacy of the triple play that we're working with. As you've heard in previous presentations, the way we got here was perseverance. We have good attorneys also, because we were sued, told we couldn't build our system, and then the incumbents that said that they didn't want to provide the service built the system while we were held up in court. So, but we persevered. We've got loyal customers. We don't have as large enough number of customers right now because of the pricing. The pricing in our community is unbelievable, and Chris just reported to me that in his paper, he identified a savings of over $12 million to the citizens and businesses of Monticello since we built our system due to the lower pricing. And that's undermined our ability to pay our revenue bond, and it's created some financial stress for the city itself. But the net effect for the community is the dollars are staying in the community, even though our local government has had to support it. Of course, dedicated staff, and the liquor store. The liquor store is our source of funding to counteract the pricing pressure that we've had. So we basically have been taking liquor store funds, putting into people's pocket through the form of lower telecom prices. And then customers people with telecom services that don't use FiberNet, we just ask them to go to the liquor store to help support this. So it kind of works out, all right? So up to now, it's been all fight, but there's been no flight, but there hasn't been much flaunt either. And we've settled with our bondholders on the revenue bond, which has been a good thing. It was sad. We were obligated to pay revenue from the project to our bondholders. It wasn't a general obligation of the city, so we had to work that out, and we ended up paying the bondholders $5.75 million settlement of the $26 million. Plus, we had given them some money in addition to that, outside of the revenue. So that settled out. So now it's time to work on the positive. Okay, so want to talk a little bit about 2014 and some of our improvements. We've had some good staff on board, Brian Estrom and Dan Olson. Dan Olson is the general manager of WyndhamNet, and he is working with Monticello. We are working with him as a private contractor to help us out. Brian Estrom recently was staffed up with another company. Unfortunately, we lost him, but we still have Dan, and we have good staff to support besides. Some of the service accomplishments that we've done to get us in position to flaunt it. We've migrated TV channels off from our satellite system to fiber feed, so it's not as staff intensive now. Our internet's been stabilized. We've improved our internet peering, and Chris will probably talk a little bit about that for us here. And one thing that's really kind of exciting is the concept of developing a public broadband alliance. Anyone who is here to listen to Bernie Joslin and the Blandon Foundation, they provided a grant to Monticello, and we are working with 5 other communities, including WyndhamNet, Southwest Minnesota Broadband, Scott County, and City of St. Cloud. And now we're combining our resources to try to create scale so that we can share switching equipment, we can share bandwidth, we can share understanding, best practices, and then when we have other communities that are interested as well, we can tell them how they might want to go about it. So now we're becoming a really practical-oriented, hands-on, fingernails dirty group that can really help others develop their capacity as well. So we're starting to see this utilization of knowledge and utilization of physical resources to try to lower cost and spread the wealth to others. So it's pretty exciting. And the Blandon Foundation can take some credit for that, getting us organized. Also, we've got access to 10 gig ring. That's not quite completed, but that's critical, and that's going to be coming in the near future, and that ring will be connected to all these other cities that will be part of the alliance. So with that, one of the important aspects of that is development of private connectivity for businesses, whereby instead of being on the internet, they are essentially getting direct access to another location from our community to a resource or service somewhere else, and we're working on that as a service. So, and just a quick thing, on September 22nd, we had a big rollout of our system, some upgrades, and this is what our pricing right now is for our customers. Actually, our existing customers were all ramped up to these speeds at no extra cost. And for new customers, this is what the going rate is right now, and we will be offering gig service fairly soon. And this is with a latency of about 5 milliseconds. It's really quick. Okay, so now it's time to flaunt it now. It's something that we can do that's different that we didn't conceive of when FiberNet was established. It was the triple play. Everyone wants faster speeds. They want their video and they want their phone. But now we're finding that there's a really neat thing that we can do for business that we'd never anticipated, and that's private connectivity. And I'm going to let Chris here take this slide and talk about the things that private connectivity does for our businesses that would not be available in any other community.
So the interesting thing about a fiber project in a community is that the big ticket items are always the homes. It's the largest populace that's impacted immediately, and it's what gets in the news. But what's interesting to somebody like us, Paragon started as an integrator, and what we've decided to do is become more of a service provider. And we're based here in the Twin Cities. The core nucleus of our customers are here, and what we decided to do is to go into communities such as Monticello and the Wyndham Ring and offer services to their businesses that they wouldn't be able to get from other providers, the incumbent providers, the AT&Ts, the TDSs, the Comcasts of the world. And we constructed in Edina, in one of our data centers, we have 3 around the cities, soon to be 4, and we peer those around the world. We offer more of a hybrid cloud platform, if that makes sense, since the type of services that we can offer off of that are your traditional managed services, so the type of IT services that people here in the cities have really come to enjoy, the lower cost, stack augmentation, a little bit more experience for some staff without having to hire them on. But when you get past that, what we can do are hybrid cloud hosting models. So as an IT administrator, if you can envision yourself as that, and you have constrained resources, you have constrained budget, but you need to keep up with your competitors that are located in Minneapolis, St. Paul. How do you do that if you're a technology company? Well, you can invest heavily with a capital expenditure in your company, or you can go to the rack spaces of the Amazons of the world and try to do it over the public internet. And with FiberNet, you can do that. You can get the speeds that you need to get to those cloud-hosted companies, and you can spin up cloud servers. But with that type of methodology, there's always a limitation because it's over the public internet as to what you can do, right? So what we decided to do is actually to drag the 10 gig ring that Monticello is building, and by association, the Muni Alliance, everybody on that ring will be able to benefit from that, is we've decided to land that into 1, soon 2 of our data centers and provide this hybrid cloud model to all of the constituents on that ring. So you as an IT administrator can now, put a ticket in or go to a portal and spin up a server that has your local addressing on your network. It looks, smells, acts, tastes like your server. It's on your domain, and it happens instantly, and you don't have to worry about the maintenance and upkeep. Those types of services that we enjoy here in the cities would never otherwise be possible, because if speaking as a service provider, it's prohibitive because of cost, because of competition, because of predatory last mile by the people that shall not be named. We just can't get there competitively because we price ourselves out of the market. But with an open network like FiberNet, it's all too easy. With a phone call, in a matter of minutes, you can become a customer and we can turn it up. And that's really fantastic. Not from a business model. I'm not going to lie. It's really, really good business for me. But what I can't understand is why other people aren't following along, because to be able to offer that to your constituents and to be able to use more of that glass that's in the ground, to be able to get greater utilizations and enhanced services and to differentiate yourself as a network is a great thing. So I'm going to not go too deeply into it and geek out, because I can really do that. It's a cool project. But some of the things that we can do is, the MICE, the Minnesota Internet Exchange, is a great organization. FiberNet is just peered up with them. We're peered with them. So for the proliferation of low-cost bandwidth and alternative access, it's a fantastic time. So I'm going to cut it off there, and if you have any other questions, I'll let you ask, so they apply to you.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, Chris. Mitzi, Chris, I don't know if you have anything you want to weigh in on, but I want to invite the audience, anybody who has any questions or comments or interested in buying any services, the microphone is here. Chris, as you were speaking, you mentioned, the way you described it towards the end there, sounded like the telecom reseller model. Am I oversimplifying, or is that?
No, that's really similar. Yeah, really, really similar.
Go ahead, Pam.
Pam Berrien. Jeff, I'm sorry I missed it. Tell me about the liquor store connection again.
Can I give you the address? Well, Monticello we have just a wonderful enterprise in our community. That's generated a nice kind of seed money for develop of our system. So we did all of our studies, and our preliminary dollars were funded through it. Then we did the bond sale. We didn't cash flow. Okay, so liquor funds that continue to come in were used to pay the debt that otherwise the taxpayers would have had to pay. So taxpayers have not supported it except through when they go to the liquor store. But then, of course, those liquor store funds aren't available for something else either. But that's basically how it's operated in the last few years.
Hey, Jeff, can I ask you, on those pricing that you had, if you were actually recovering your costs plus putting a little bit back into your network, how much would you need to be, how much higher percentage-wise would you need to be charging?
Well, that's a great question. I haven't run those numbers because actually the competitive pressure is just what it is. We can't really afford to charge any more than that, okay?
Oh,
But it would be good to know what we would need to generate in order to cash flow.
Mm-hmm.
But I can run those numbers for you and get them for you.
So just very briefly, because I know that Jeff's patient. Monticello launched the service, and they did not get to the number of customers they anticipated because they were growing very well. And then Charter came back with the most aggressive price cuts we've seen in, I believe it's 13 years. Basically, Monticello is now home to the only place that we can identify on planet Earth with two competing fiber-to-the-home citywide networks. Literally, I've asked international analysts, many of the top ones, no other place knows of a place where they have two fiber-to-the-home networks, which tells us a number of important things. But one of them is that the cable company freaked out. And so they took the $145 top-of-the-line package with the fastest internet speeds and all the cable channels, and they offered it for $60 a month guaranteed rate for 2 years, which means they're probably losing between $20 and $30 per month per person who takes that. At the point that they did that, Jeff's network unfortunately stopped adding customers basically for some short period of time because it's incredibly difficult to deal with that kind of predatory pricing, which is still technically illegal in the United States of America, but those statutes don't seem to be enforced anymore, unfortunately. So Monticello has had incredibly bad luck in terms of being the test case on planet Earth for two fiber-to-the-home networks competing head-to-head. And it's introduced some stresses that they've had to reevaluate how they're doing business. They have new management now, and I think it's heading in an exciting direction.
My question's for Mitzi regarding your network. Am I understanding correctly that you're offering your network to private entities to utilize? Is that is it a public-private?
Yeah, and actually, if we can you pull up that presentation, just the first slide, or the second slide, I guess? Yep. Go to the second slide. Okay. Yeah, so in here, the blue segments, the ERIC grant required you to offer fiber on an open access basis to competitors. And I believe that you need to price it at 40% below market for the first 2 years. And actually, if you talk with Chris Murden, Howard County is actually leasing. So just, let me kind of give a quick background. In Maryland, for the Recovery and Reinvestment Act grant, what we ended up doing was a statewide grant. And in there are 10 counties and cities in the central part of Maryland who received about 2/3 of it, because that's where people are. And what we did as a group is that we said, okay, when we install the fiber, we will put in 24 strands of fiber that we will specifically allocate to be able to lease out. And for us as a government, some people are small and they're just easier. So Howard County has started doing it. Carroll County, it's kind of the Pennsylvania border, they've started leasing that fiber. So our intention is to do it. But the thing in Montgomery County is because we had an established network, you can see that a lot of what we did was lateral, except where we were connecting our hub sites. So that's kind of a challenge as well, as in, well, who needs to get access? The state actually needs some access to some things, and so we're kind of working with them on that. And that's why the other thing is that, I was looking at Zayo this morning. If I can borrow that pointer for a minute. it's funny that, see, so up in this area, I guess right in here, that's kind of where I zoomed in and showed you, or actually, sorry, it's down here where I zoomed in and showed you. You can see we don't have a lot of stuff that's there because it was farmland that got converted, and there is another fiber that's there for other purposes. So, yes, we are going to make some of this blue available, but what we're also really trying to do is to focus on the getting to the business, that last mile. It's still the major expense of the network. So anything that we can do that actually encourages, and if we can actually just go to the map, the internet, yeah. And go to the second tab, please. Thank you. Okay, so you can see here, the issue is if you could do a project where I build out to this building and this building and this building, and whether that's I gave an incentive to the developer, so if you do it, I'll give you some tax break, or we put it in, and these are questions we're trying to answer. Do we want to own it? Do we care if somebody else owns it? Does it matter if you have multiple competitors? But ideally what you'd have is, so let's say somewhere over here is a meet me point. And so if I'm a competitor, I just have to get to that spot. And from that spot, I could access that existing infrastructure, which lowers the cost for me to serve the business. And it also means that as a business, if I want a competitor to come in, ideally, you just have to switch something at the meet me spot. It doesn't require me to pay a second competitor to come out and build exactly where the first competitor was built. And so that's what we're really trying to do, is to leverage, because the thing is, we could add 25 of like Johns Hopkins and things to our network, and that's not a big problem. We're not set up to add 300 businesses and to do the billing and the service and all that kinds of stuff that goes with it. So we really want to figure out is how do we leverage a real public-private partnership, and what are the things we can do to incentivize and lower the costs for infrastructure to get out there, make it competitive for different variety of providers, and ultimately, because what we want, we think, is that by having these high speeds available, is that we attract jobs. And for us, we're in the business of wanting to attract jobs. We're sort of, the fiber is just a means to an end.
Okay, and just as a follow-up, I was wondering how you got around the other competitors that have fiber in your community saying that government shouldn't. I mean,
well, okay, so one is, and if you go, actually, if you go to the first tab, so the first thing is we built with the Herrera grant. We needed to build that fiber for ourselves. And we're not at the space now where we have offered anything for sale, so that hasn't been an issue. But what we would like to do is to work with the providers to say, we don't want to compete against you and offer a service. What we want to do is to facilitate your ability to get out there and provide it. So if we change in our building codes so that the developers put in riser space, it's all things really that are in Joanne's paper. And Sandy, they've gotten some things, and actually we were talking about how to refine those types of things. So I think, and the reason is that I see that becomes a problem when we're in the business, particularly in Montgomery County, because it's not a place where there's nobody out there. We have 3 cable operators, we've got fiber providers. So what we really need to focus on is how do we help those people compete against each other, and hopefully what that means is that people get more service for the same price.
Dwight Williams, board member-elect for NATO. This question is for Mitzi. Also, Mitzi, in your description of broadband to the community or to business, you identified it as 100 gigabits and secured. Mm-hmm. Can you elaborate on that secured and what that means to a particular entity that would receive that services?
Yeah. If we can go to the second tab. So if we can zoom out, please. And let's go out one more, okay. And actually, well, in the layering, if you could turn off the buildings, that would be good. Just so it'll be easier to read. Great. Okay. So the issue is that when Montgomery, so all these little red dots, or there's yellow, okay, see those yellow squares? Sorry. The yellow squares represent cybersecurity businesses that exist in the county. We have NIST, which is the National Institute for Standards, I can't remember the acronym. And if you zoom out for a minute, you'll see it. Standards and technology, thank you. That's that pink area that's actually up at the top of the map. And so what we're looking at doing is how can we, for us internally as a county, we have various things that we're looking at keeping our network secure. And the number one thing that people will tell you, it's the people that work for you. It's people giving out their passwords. It's people when somebody calls in and says, I don't know something, they just tell them what the password is. That's your biggest problem. But, so what we're trying to work on is, and what the county would like to position, the feds actually have $35 million in the budget right now, and they are looking to create what would be the equivalent of Fort Meade as a civilian cybersecurity center, which we would love to have in Montgomery County. So what you're trying to do is develop protocols, come up with best practices. We have tax credits for cybersecurity companies. So it's kind of just sort of a general industry effort. It's also a matter of, in particularly, most people have seen the Home Depot, and people saw previously the Target, things with credit card data. University of Maryland had a big issue that came up, and that really put it on people's screens. So we've actually engaged in a $500,000 effort looking at where your penetration testing and trying to figure out strength. And the issue is that the goal in cybersecurity is that you'll never prevent all the attacks. What you want to do is to minimize the damage when it happens. And so that it's just really kind of a holistic effort that we're looking at. But the other thing that we're looking at trying to leverage on these things are creating internships, partnerships. If you have these kinds of networks and speeds, you can partner with a federal agency and say, we'll give you this speed and this access if you do these kinds of things so that we could test it, come up with some data. That's having these research institutions. And that's, again, that's an asset that we particularly have in our county. You have your own intellectual assets that you want to leverage for whatever's happening is what we're trying to build on.
So I want to ask Chris for a kind of up to the minute on the big fight over who gets to decide whether local communities can build their own networks or not, just from your perspective.
Sure. Well, the big fight is certainly still being fought across 20 states and possibly more. We'll see what happens in January when we see if the cable industry wants to try and limit local choice in more states. Right now, there's a very big test proceeding at the FCC where I think a step back for a second. In January, the DC Circuit Court responded to the net neutrality rules by striking them down. But within it, it basically said the FCC has these enhanced powers under Section 706, which is part of the Telecommunications Act of 96. And everyone knew that Section 706 was there, but no one really knew what it meant or how it could be used. And one of the things that came out of that ruling was that the FCC, in the opinion of at least one judge, could use that power to remove state laws that limited local authority to build networks. So, City of Wilson and City of Chattanooga both filed petitions asking that laws that are preventing them, both of them very financially successful networks that have basically incredibly benefited their communities. I mean, I think the vast majority of municipal networks we've shown benefit their communities, but in the case of Wilson and Chattanooga, there can be no doubt. These are some of the most high-profile, tremendous community networks, and they're prohibited from expanding. And so today is the final day to file reply to comments, and then the FCC will be considering the petitions and making a decision at some point in the near future, we hope. Chairman Wheeler has been incredibly outspoken on the need to remove state laws that are limiting local networks. Now, he can't say anything about these proceedings, but we have a sense that this is a priority for him. So with him and the other two Democratic Party commissioners, we have a high hope that this is something that is going to happen. I don't think we've seen anything in the record that surprises anyone thus far. I do think tomorrow morning when I read the reply to comments of industry, I'll find out if I do a good job or not, because a number of us are going to be targeted as being inaccurate. So we'll find out what happens there in that. But there's going to be opportunities for ex partes. So if anyone still wants to contribute to the docket and to make the case that this decision should be vested locally and should not be able to be stopped by states, then there will be opportunities, and people within NATOA can certainly help you to file an ex parte, which is basically just means something for the record after the reporting period is closed. So that's what's happening there. That's the most exciting place. We still have to win this, frankly, in the states ultimately. I don't see a possibility of one action at the federal level removing all barriers to municipal networks. So I think we have to continue educating state policymakers as to why these barriers are a bad thing. And that's going to be an effort that CLIC, and I hope a lot of people in this room are going to contribute toward.
And actually, just quickly, I know we're out of time, just add on to that we had a state legislator, and we've been talking about communication sales tax in Montgomery County, and she hosted at the last MACO region a broadband panel, and various people were up there and talking about the broadband projects that they were doing in their community. And afterwards, what she said was, oh, I had no idea. And so for those of you who have broadband networks where you're doing it to your community anchor institutions, filing things at the FCC where you just, even a little fact sheet, this is what we do, this is what we operate. Ours, we now operate, it probably is about $2.5 million operation, and we estimate that it's probably $22 to $26 million that we'd be spending annually if we had to buy those services commercially. And we have the ability to provide a lot more services for ourselves that if we had to buy them commercially, we just would forego doing. So it's always useful if you file that information. You don't have to take a position necessarily on it, but you can just say, in our community, we have had community broadband, and this is what we're doing with it.
I'd like to thank all our panelists for bringing Muni Broadband into focus and giving us a job to do when we go home. Can we say thank you? Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Mitzi, Jeff, Chris Dye. Thank you very much. I have 3 quick announcements for housekeeping.